Hey guys, how's it going? So this is going to be a review of the ROG Flow Z13 2025 model with the new Ryzen AI Max. This one's a 395, the top end spec with 128 gigabytes of RAM. It's running at 8,000 megatransfers per second, super fast stuff. So my overall opinion on this device is a bit mixed. So let's just get right into it. First, I want to start talking about the good stuff. This new chip is incredibly efficient. In this setting right now, I am playing Horizon Forbidden West. Yes, that's the new one with high settings at the full native resolution of this tablet, which is over QHD. And in silent mode, I'm getting over 30 FPS. So that's one of the coolest things about this chip. And because it's in a 13-inch package, it's incredibly portable. So I'm just sitting here running 30 watts playing a AAA title in settings that rivals what a PS5 Pro can do in QHD Plus, running only 30 watts in silent mode. But the reason why I chose 30 watts is because it gives me less battery anxiety. If you go up to performance, you start to use like 35 to 40 watts. Turbo, you could go up to 60 watts. And if you wanted to set up that manual mode, you could use all the way up to like 85 to 90 watts. But those last two settings really starts to drain your battery. That's, again, why I like carrying a portable battery with me. Even when you're maxing out this chip, it's using 90 watts total. I mean, just let's put this in perspective. If you are using an RTX 4070 laptop version, that pushes up to 115 watts just for the GPU alone. Not even talking about the CPU, which needs like another 30 watts. So that's kind of what makes this whole thing groundbreaking. I've just been really enjoying getting out of the house. We've been having some good weather recently. Just going to a park and just gaming and just using my laptop without really having to worry about battery or having to be sitting somewhere where there's a nearby outlet. I just feel like I have more freedom, and this entire package is under £3 too. Like, there's no way you can get a device that performs like this small and this light. That's been like the coolest and greatest thing about it. So anyway, before I continue, let's just talk about the build and design quickly. This is not a new device for ASUS, but it is redesigned for 2025, and I really like it. It strikes a good balance between being gamery, futuristic, and also professional, and also postmodern looking. So I really, really love the design. Around the back, where the ventilation is, the cutouts are just really well precisioned. There's some ROG Easter eggs, and you know it won't be an ROG product without those. There is a camera at the back. I completely forgot to even test it. It's not something I'm really interested in. And the cool thing is, because it is a tablet, it has a built-in hinge, similar to something like the Surface, etc. So there are some rubber feet here, which does help, but I have found that when this is on your lap, this hinge kind of does cut into your leg a little bit, gets a little bit uncomfortable, but hey, like to have it. And on the front, before I even open up the lid, you can see some more ROG branding, etc. So opening it up, you're greeted by this keyboard. And this does have RGB, but it's incredibly dim. It's a bit disappointing. The trackpad is fine. It works really well. It glides well. So coming to the front, you are greeted by the screen. And this could be an issue for some people because it is not OLED. But because it's not OLED, it allows it to get up to 500 nits, which is great for being outdoors. And for a device like this, you don't want to be stuck inside like I mentioned earlier. You want to be taking this out and about. The colors are really good too. You're 100% DCI-P3, 100% sRGB, no surprises there. But even Adobe RGB is 90%. And when I was doing my editing on this laptop, yes, this is powerful enough to do my 4K editing. I'll get into more performance stuff later on. The screen has been great to correct colors and all that stuff. And even when I was editing some raw photos with my camera, etc., I found this display to be great. I think the biggest issue with this display, though, is the contrast ratio. For this type of traditional IPS display, it's not bad. It's pretty good. Over 1300 to 1 contrast ratio is nice, and 0.39 black levels, even at over 500 nits, is pretty impressive for this type of technology. But unfortunately, it's not mini LED. I wish it was at least mini LED. I bet anything in the world that ASUS would have loved to include a more competitive panel. But unfortunately, I don't think that particular panel exists. But to get 180 hertz, 13 inches, QHD plus, this might have been the only thing available. Hopefully, as this type of device gets more and more popular, Asus can start developing their own or working with manufacturers to custom design panels for this device. Anyway, moving on. One issue I've been having with this trackpad is there is some keyboard flex on it. Not the end of the world, but I do notice it sometimes when I'm typing. And when my hand is resting on the palm rest, sometimes when I click, the trackpad gets stuck and it wouldn't come back up until I take my hand off of the palm rest. So there's been some times when I'm like using this on my lap, it just kind of became a feature that whenever I press down on the palm rest, I just naturally have to bring my hand up to get the actual trackpad to reset to its original position. But because it is removable, you don't have to use this trackpad. You can just use whatever keyboard and mouse you want. Maybe just get like a little stand for this. So that's the thing. That's another good thing about this. It's so versatile. You can use this in so many different positions. So you can just have this connected to your monitor, like what I do behind me here when I'm actually doing my editing and stuff. And then just keep this around as a secondary screen. The hinge allows it to go pretty far back too. One thing I will say though is 13 inches is a bit small. I wish it was 14 inches. Going back to a 14-inch laptop, it's a pretty substantial difference in screen size. Okay, so let's talk about some of the things that have been really bugging me that is preventing me from wanting to use this as my only laptop. This M.2 SSD, it uses the smaller 2230 variety, and I get it. This is a small device, so this is probably the best that they could fit, but it's only available in up to 2 terabytes, and there's only one slot. I would really like to be able to have more. There is a 4 terabyte available that I found, but it's a M.2 2242, and that does not fit in here based off of what I've been able to research. So you're limited to only 1 terabyte if you buy it from Asus. And if you wanted to upgrade it, it seems like you're only limited to 2 terabytes. And the transfer speeds are not as fast as the proper size M.2. So that is a bit of a bummer. The thing is, like, if you just install Call of Duty alone, you're using a quarter of your total storage. If you happen to do video work on this, which I do, it's not going to be enough. If you like to keep your entire collection, you're just not going to be able to do that. And I think that's a very limiting factor with this particular device. And I know a lot of people complain, since we're talking about upgradability, that the RAM is not able to be upgraded, but this is an APU. It's just one chip. That's something that's not available. And I'm starting to prefer, I know this sounds weird, when RAM is built into the laptop because it's always faster, and faster RAM usually is noticeable to me, even in just regular Windows navigation. In gaming, I've noticed an improvement in some games too, and especially when I'm doing video editing, I notice the speed increase with the RAM. And if you're doing AI modeling, this 128 gigabyte version is perfect for that. Coming back to the next thing I want to talk about that might not be completely positive is the performance. So let's just get right into those numbers. So I'm going to start off with TimeSpy like I typically do, and this is performing as good as a 4060, which is what it was advertised to be in some cases. But I mean, this is just TimeSpy. It's not always indicative of what actual gameplay is. I'll get into that a little bit more. I just wanted to show you this so you could get an idea of how this compares to all the laptops that I've tested in the past. So we're going to go next to the Steel Nomad Lite. It's using the Vulkan API, and it does a much better job of simulating what an actual workload of these devices do when gaming, when it's stressing both the CPU and the GPU simultaneously, versus TimeSpy splitting the test into 2 types, a GPU test and a CPU test, and then does it individually. I ended up getting a MacBook Pro 14.2. At some point, I want to do a comparison between these two because, as you can see, in terms of the performance so far, they are pretty equivalent. This one is the M4 Max. I will come back to this laptop in a separate video, so if you want to see these two go head to head, get subscribed. This is the first test of many where I tested the different TDPs, so you could get a good sense of how it performs at its different presets that are created by Armory Crate. And the manual preset I created just pushes everything to the max. You could bring it all the way up to 92 watts, but realistically, I found that it just tends to hover around the 85 watt mark. Mostly, it does start to thermal throttle, which seems to thermal throttle around 90 degrees Celsius, so it doesn't want to go above 90 degrees. But hey, when you put it on manual, it is beating the MacBook M4 Max. There was all this talk about how ARM is better than x86 and x86 is going to go extinct, etc. Based off what I've been seeing so far from Intel's Lunar Lake and the AMD Ryzen 9 chips and even this new Ryzen Max chip, that's not the case. x86 is not going anywhere. Even when I'm running at 40 watts in silent mode, or even 30 watts if you use a 100-watt charger, it is still destroying everything else out there that I've tested. You can see that the ROG Ally is getting 2,855. And that's running at 30 watts. I really tried to see if there was a way I could decrease the wattage on the Ryzen 9 AI 395. It doesn't seem like I can get it to run under 30 watts. So when you're just in idle in Windows, etc., it'll use like 10 to 12 watts just running Windows. But I think when you start using the GPU and the CPU, if you're running some type of 3D application like gaming, it will require a minimum of 30 watts to run. So for those who are wondering if you could run this at 15 watts and be able to get something similar to what you would get like on a Steam Deck or a ROG Ally X, and get battery that'll last forever, but it doesn't seem like that's possible on this. So here's another thing that I had a hard time when I was like, how do I show this? Should I compare this to all their gaming laptops, like with the 4070s, or should I compare this to all their laptops with an APU or like Steam Decks, etc.? Because this is, after all, integrated graphics, not a dedicated graphics. But I just figured I'd do both. Even on battery, running the lowest watt at 28 watts in silent mode, it's still able to outperform just about any other integrated graphics out there. And then the more power you give it, the more powerful it gets. This is running Cyberpunk with the Steam Deck settings, and it's great. So I also ran Avatar too, just so you could get an idea. Again, it's the best. And it was actually the only time where an integrated graphics is able to play that game at all. And I do also want to point out that all of these games are running in 1080p. When I decided to do these tests on integrated graphics, I did decide to use 1080p because that's all that could run. But when we start comparing this laptop to some of the bigger boys out there, you'll start to see those in QHD and 4K even. So bear with me. So then obviously I really wanted to test Call of Duty, and you're able to get really good frame rates throughout all the different presets available to you. Okay, so now let's get into the first game where I'm actually testing this compared to some of the other bigger laptops out there. And this is kind of where I was hinting at that my opinions on this laptop and chip is a bit mixed because it is priced at a 4060 to 4070 level laptop. But once you start comparing it to all the laptops in this price point, then it just can't compete. But I do also really want to point out that I mentioned this earlier. This is running everything on manual mode. I wanted to squeeze as much juice out of it as I can. So it's running at an average of 85 watts the entire time. The RTX 4090 uses 150 watts just on the GPU alone, and then the CPU hovers anywhere between 40 and 70 watts. So at the end of the day, this is still impressive, but it just can't compete with some of the larger laptops out there. In this one particular title, in QHD, running Call of Duty, it is beating the 4070s out there. So that part is actually amazing. It's only when we get to the more graphically intensive games like Cyberpunk is when we start to see issues forming. The way I test Cyberpunk in this particular chart is everything is maxed out. So it's RTX overdrive with, in this case, it's going to be FSR. If I had a NVIDIA GPU, I would be using DLSS because it does need the help. And I only ran it at 1080p because it's not able to run. At 1080p with the RTX 4070, you're still able to get 38 FPS. And yes, that is absolutely playable. But ray tracing on this chip is just not good. And another thing I want to point out too is this is an 8000 series GPU. So you're not getting the new version of FSR. So you're not getting FSR 4 on this, which is what the claims are saying is on par with DLSS now. FSR 1 and 2 look okay, but they're not as good as DLSS. So that's a bit of another downfall in my opinion. So let's go to the next game. Let's look at Dying Light. This one's using ray tracing, and I'm only getting 50 FPS at 1080p. As you can see with the 4070, even on the Transcend 14, which used the lower watt 4070, it's double. So this whole thing about this being a RTX 4060, 4070, yes, in some cases, but when you start using ray tracing, it's not even close. At 1440p, you're getting 37 FPS, so that becomes barely playable, but you cannot play this game at 4K with maxed out settings. So now let's look at Horizon Zero Dawn. So if you're tired of me talking about DLSS and ray tracing and all that stuff, the way I've chosen to test Horizon Zero Dawn doesn't have any of that. It's good old-fashioned rasterization. So at 1080p, you're getting 91 FPS, which is in line with some of the 4070s. So there goes that claim where some people were saying it's like a 4070. But here's the thing, though. When you get to QHD, which is what this native resolution is, you're only getting 65 FPS, while on the 4070s, you can get up to 90 FPS if you went for the big boy Alienware M16 with that 4070. And even on the 4060, you're getting 77 FPS. So we're a bit behind here if you did want to play at 4K. So what I've noticed is this is not a 4K card. I've ran just about every single game connected to a 4K monitor, and it's just not quite there. And in the settings, I allocated 16 gigabytes of RAM to the GPU, which I thought would give it some extra juice to help get me there, but it hasn't really been making much difference once you give it more than 8 gigabytes of RAM. So this is not a 4K card, no matter what you do. So even with this older game, Horizon Zero Dawn, you're only getting 32 FPS. So next was Shadow of the Tomb Raider, kind of telling the same story here. Again, this is good old-fashioned rasterization. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you treat this as like a portable gaming laptop that you could just carry with you, that's small, thin, and light, then I think it's great. If you try to compare this to a 4060 or a 4070, I think you'll be disappointed. So that's kind of what I was hinting to at the beginning of this video. So now let's get into Cinebench. It actually does very well on Cinebench here. It doesn't quite beat the M4 Max 14-core version that I have, but it does pretty well. And it actually does really well against some of those gigantic, thick, and heavy, loud gaming laptops too. So that's why I've been enjoying carrying this laptop around to do like photo editing and video editing and all that stuff on the go. Okay, so that's enough on the performance. So I'm curious, let me know in the comments, what do you guys think about this? Because in some ways, it is incredible. Just having this 13-inch device that's able to perform this well, but also at the same time, based off of how it's priced, it can't compete with all the laptops in that same price class. But with those, you're expecting to always carry the charger with you if you plan on gaming. So really curious what you guys think. So while I am calling this a review of this device, I'll be doing some other videos on it. So whatever you want to see me cover next, get subscribed and let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.